Welcome, commanders. Welcome to this Alliance of Nations gathering. I am Colonel Austin. Today, together with General Herman and Brigadier Betty, we'll reminisce about the events that shook the world in 2005 and 2006 and share our memories of the hard war we had to fight against Xylvania. Herman, Betty, how are you feeling?
Never better, Austin. It's so good to see you two again.
You bet! It's like we never left. It'll be good to go over the campaign again. Can't say we've seen much action lately.
Good. And what have you both been up to lately?
I still supervise training sorties with a focus on frontier tundran cooperation. For this reason, I'm still in touch with Marshal Nova.
And I took responsibility for Fort Gridiron. The boys have never been so in shape. The frontier is ready for a fight any day.
Good to hear. All right, let's get going. Naturally, we'll start with the Tundran offensive of September 2005, which started it all. Betty, you were the one stumbling upon the Tundran invasion force, weren't you?
Indeed, Austin. I remember it vividly. Herman had green-lighted my idea of a sortie to perk up our men's spirits, and I was supervising a combat patrol near the border with the Tundran territories. Although we did suspect the Tundrans were up to something, it was simply meant to be a simple patrol. But as soon as we left Fort Gridiron, we spotted a Tundran spy. He had set up listening posts left and right, and even released spy balloons. After a bit of investigating in the area, we even found out they had captured one of our recon units. That's when Alpha Company discovered the Tundran invasion force. The offensive came just after.
Yeah, that was a nasty piece of sneaky surprise attack by the Tundrans. But I must say, we wasted no time retaliating. Bravo Company, although encircled following the initial Tundran offensive, managed to make quite a mess behind enemy lines. The turnip eaters had set up supply bases along the border to keep their momentum going, but these soon became easy targets. No disrespect to Gorgie's memory, but he should have defended his supply lines better.
Indeed, that was a major oversight on the Tundrans' part. They advanced too fast without safeguarding their rear, putting their supplies in jeopardy. We were able to turn the situation around quite rapidly and advance through northern tundra.
That region was very mountainous. But we had a radar station at Windbreak Ridge giving us an advantage in intelligence quality. Hey, Austin, that's where you met Major Nellie, isn't it?
Quite right. The Tundrans wanted the radar station at Windbreak Ridge out of commission, and Major Nellie herself led the attack. She was quite cunning, but I was able to repel her advances. For a time, shall we say?
Austin, you never cease to amaze me.
The defense of Windbreak Ridge is still taught at the Frontier Military Academy. But unfortunately, we were soon hit by some very bad news. One of our recon units had been captured again, in possession of critical intelligence. We had to rescue them ASAP. There was so much urgency that we didn't even name the op. It was simply named Operation POW.
Indeed, Betty, and I do remember that day.
Nova! And Nellie, too.
Good morning to all of you. Well, I already saw you this morning, Austin.
It's good to see you are well, Marshal Nova. Thank you for making time to join us.
I'm sorry for being late. I had to check some things with Tundran Command.
It's no problem at all. Please take a sit. So we were about to discuss how Betty led the rescue to free our captive recon unit.
Oh yeah, it was very frustrating. This recon driver was extremely skilled. No roadblock could slow him down.
It was a very intense ride indeed. I thought we had lost the recon in the woods at some point, but in the end, our boys managed to get back to our lines.
And they were able to give us some excellent intelligence about the location of the main Tundran HQ in the Polikarpov region. I remember leading the assault on Castle Potemkin. That was a tough nut to crack, as Nellie had set up an impenetrable anti-armor defensive line, but we were able to break through somehow and to capture the castle.
I was in awe before your masterful tactics, Austin. You really did manage to penetrate my defenses. Marshal Nova was furious, to say the least.
Ha! Sorry if I yelled at you, Nellie. It was extremely dire news at the time. You bet it was! Castle Potemkin gave us the location of the Tundrans' Iron 8, their best tank division. We went in with much armor ourselves, and we were able to pick their tanks one by one. But no offense, Nova. I must admit that was a pretty tough battle. Yes, General, it was a mechanized skirmish for the ages. After this battle, I understood that the war couldn't end well for Tundra, but who could have imagined what followed? The Xylvanians, these traitors.
I guess you weren't the only one thinking the war was basically over for Tundra, Nova. Your father made a deal with the Xylvanians to turn the situation around. But the Xylvanians ended up attacking both our nations.
My father did only what he thought best for Tundra, Betty. He was that kind of man.
Huh, who could that be?
Greetings, my old foes.
Kaiser Vlad! How did you get this number? Never mind that. Where are you right now?
As if I would disclose that information. Rather than telling you my whereabouts, how about I partake in your cozy chat? You were about to talk about me, I suppose?
Admittedly, that's true. We were about to talk about the Dune Sea campaign.
Ah, yes, the Dune Sea. The site of Xylvania's most brilliant victories. My plan was to attack this barren desert to secure nearer site for Xylvania's war effort.
Unfortunately for you, the frontier already had bases there, and we were able to hold our ground for quite some time.
Maybe, General. But before long, we had secured the most bountiful parts of the region. And most importantly, the Tundrans were driven out of the Dune Sea. And were it not for your cursed luck, Dusty Springs would have been the graveyard of the whole Tundran Fifth Army.
It wasn't luck that saved us, Kaiser Vlad. It was our frontier allies. The evacuation at Dusty Springs was the result of the cooperation between frontier and Tundran forces.
I couldn't agree more. And it was this cooperation that eventually led to the Xylvanian defeat, remember?
Indeed, after the disaster at Dusty Springs, the Frontier deployed the 4th Armored Division at Hot Flats and recaptured the Nerosite fields there.
Ingrid greatly disappointed me that day. The loss of Hot Flats was a cruel blow to our hopes of conquest.
I guess it couldn't have been more painful than when we bombed and destroyed your main extraction facilities in the south of the Dune Sea. Vampire Squadron almost shot down all of our bombers. But we still managed to reduce your extraction towers to dust and rubble. This is where the campaign really ended for you.
Indeed. That treacherous Tsar Gorgi had returned from exile and brought enough air power with him to threaten Vampire Squadron.
Then, you had my father killed.
Indeed, Marshal. I had Commandant Ubel swiftly assassinate the Tsar. I couldn't let his actions go unpunished. But even then, I had no choice but to refocus our operations away from the Dune Sea. And thus, our next theater of operations would be...
the Coral Atolls.
Empress Leiko, I hadn't noticed you were here.
Salutations, honorable generals. It is a pleasure to meet with you again.
Likewise, Empress Leiko. I'm glad you found your way here.
Austin, you devil! You knew she was coming?
Did you know that Kaiser Vlad would call too? Had you planned that as well?
I will let this to your imagination.
That's the Frontier's best strategist for you.
I brought some tea from the Solar Empire. Please help yourselves.
Don't mind if I do. Thank you, Empress. I would rate this tea higher than turnip rations.
Silence with your pleasantries!
I assure you, Kaiser Vlad, you are dearly missing out.
Were you about to talk about Beachy Point?
Even before that, we had sent an expeditionary force to meet with you, Empress Leiko, but they were intercepted by the Xylvanians, sparkling the need for the Frontier to intervene in the Coral Atolls. Beachy Point had been captured by the Xylvanians during their first attack wave, and it was the first island we liberated.
Even today, I still cannot fathom how your pathetic amphibious assault could defeat my defenses.
It's true that the landing was risky. The Frontier Doctrine at the time indicated that we should perform all our landings via T-copters. Nevertheless, the mission was a success. Not only did we recapture Beachy Point, the engagement also ended with our fighters shooting down an Xylvanian strato-destroyer.
If only you could imagine my wrath. I fired many heads of department that day. Half the nation's budget had been used to build this strato-destroyer, and we had only 3 of those.
That should serve as a lesson, Kaiser Vlad. The might of a nation is not always found in the size of its weapons.
Don't bother lecturing me, Empress. Your ancestors were literally building weapons of mass destruction in space.
That may be true, but we have since renounced our violent past.
That only serves to show your cowardice.
Calm down, Kaiser Vlad, if this is even possible. Did you contact us only to complain?
Anyway, that strato-destroyer business was only the start of Vlad's trouble in the Coral Atolls. Not long after, I personally led the 55th Battalion, aka the Crack Squad, in a mission to sabotage several key Xylvanian installations on Coconut Island. The area was defended by Ubel, that bird brain. The communications tower was easy enough to capture, the fuel refinery a bit less so, but the highlight of this mission really was blowing up the gigantic Xylvanian munitions dump that was just sitting there.
This was a dark blow to our war capabilities, and so soon in the campaign too. Fortunately, Commandant Ubel and the Countess were competent enough to capture Aloha Atoll. Its strategic position in the larger coral atolls ensured our forces a great freedom of movement across all of the Solar Empire territories.
Aloha Atoll would indeed become the site of a major clash not long after. Frontier HQ was adamant that the island could not remain in Xylvanian hands.
I remember we took some time to prepare this operation. The plan was that I would airdrop a team of rifle grunts with the mission of capturing the fortress at the center of the island.
And all the while, air forces under my supervision would cover your grunts. All in all, it went about according to plan.
Maybe you were thinking you were taking me by surprise, but I could predict your every move. My bomber squadrons and artillery batteries were ready to drive your pitiful invasion force back into the sea.
Fortunately, Austin provided us with incredibly tight air support. It was a walk in the park.
Although the skirmish escalated to the next level when not one but two Xylvanian strato-destroyers made their appearance in the airspace above the island.
According to all odds, Xylvania should have prevailed that day. Why we lost, I cannot tell.
We had also deployed a strato-destroyer of our own, and I guess our pilot was just that much better than yours.
I couldn't refrain my anger. After this defeat, I redirected my troops to Tiki Bay. My plan was flawless. I would deploy 2 battle stations covered by Countess Ingrid's Squadron 66.
But my warriors were ready, and you weren't able to prevent Solar soldiers from recapturing the fortress east of the island.
It didn't matter to me. 2 battle stations would have been enough to deal with your miserable battalion.
But Frontier Command also sent my battalion into the fray. And Frontier forces were able to land reinforcements at the center of Tiki Bay. Our AA vehicles made short work of your fighter squadron, and then it was a piece of cake for our gunships to destroy your battle stations. We taught you a great lesson in military tactics that day.
Ingrid had let me down again. It is around this time that she began to grow an unhealthy interest in the mystic about the Iron Legion.
This would cause a lot of trouble for us all sometime afterwards. But let's not get too fast. Even with Tiki Bay recaptured, there was still one more battle to be fought before the Coral Atolls could be considered liberated.
Indeed, the Xylvanians had set up their main command center around a crater of heavily defended islands. This was always being to be a hard fight, but Herman had arranged things ahead of time with Frontier HQ.
Woo-ha! I made it possible for Frontier HQ to greenlight deployment of one of our Ajax T-500 battle stations. We had very limited supplies of these vehicles, but that mission required it.
That's for sure, considering the Xylvanians had once again deployed 2 battle stations of their own in the area. But with our own battle station, a bomber, a squad of hardened vets, and some solar allies present in the area, we were sporting some serious firepower. All in all, I'd say it wasn't that hard to recapture this island chain.
That was the very last time I had Ingrid supervised any military operation. After our command center was captured, our only option was to retreat back to the fatherland, to Xylvania itself.
At this point, I think we all knew that the war would end sooner rather than later. And yet, the thought of having to land on Xylvanian shores was a bitter one.
You can say that again! Vlad had saturated the entire Xylvanian shoreline with entrenched defenses, and even if we passed those, we would still have to be fast enough to take the bridges on the river Styx before the Xylvanians would destroy them, basically trapping us into the Xylvanian hinterlands. Intel was pretty confident that it would be a pretty costly landing operation.
After we retreated back behind our borders, I waited for you, generals of the Alliance of Nations. But you were slow to come.
I personally slowed down preparations so that we could make sure everything was ready for an efficient amphibious assault. At this point, rushing things could have robbed us of our advantage.
Waiting! It's always waiting with you, Austin. If I hadn't pushed for the assault to happen before winter, we would still be waiting for it today. In the end, we did launch the attack, and the landings were successful.
That's right. We made fast progress inland, but soon we were stopped by the river Styx. I remember Frontier Command being in a state of panic when we realized the Xylvanians had already prepared the bridges for demolition.
Yeah, I quickly assembled units from the 2nd Armored Division that had already reached the area, and I captured the bridges in the blink of an eye.
You were clearly the man for the job. Your quick and aggressive decision-making helped us secure the bridges and allowed our troops to safely cross the river.
Yeah, but I must admit my battalion fell into an ambush just after we had taken the bridges, in a place called the Crater of Shadows. Fortunately, we were able to clear the area in time, but it could have taken a turn for the worse. All the same, the way was paved for our advance. The first Tundran army gathered on the other side of the river and advanced northeast, while Frontier Command sent its units in the northwest, directly towards the Vladstag. We didn't encounter too much resistance, but I think it was another story for you, right, Betty?
Indeed. We had to follow a road simply called the Road to Xylvania, one of the main artery in the whole country. But Vlad had fortifications constructed all along the way.
You were advancing deep into Xylvania, Brigadier. You had to pay dearly for every inch of advance.
But after a few dozens of kilometers, we encountered the vanguard of the Iron Legion.
Yes, Ingrid had betrayed me. She had stole my sword, sneaked away, taken Ubel with her, and awakened the Iron Legion. She was immediately consumed by the Legion's terrible power, but at least Ubel was loyal enough to come back to me.
Legion units were incredibly tough, and numerous too. Frontier Command had authorized deployment of a battle station, but even with that much firepower, we had a hard time taking the road to Xylvania. Our anti-air vets shot down dozens of Legion gunships that day.
But in the end, my Austin saved us all. Isn't that right?
I don't know if I'd put it that way.
Don't be modest, Austin. You were leading the 4th Armored Division again, and your advanced units were the closest to the Crater of the Sun, the place where Ingrid had revived the Iron Legion.
Yes, I was uniquely positioned to intervene.
And for once you didn't wait. Bless you for that.
The 4th Armored Division was actually chasing retreating Xylvanian units when we reached the periphery of the Crater of the Sun. Frontier intelligence had already found out that it was the point of origin of the Iron Legion. At the center of the crater stood the cenotaph. It was clear we had to destroy it if we were to stop the Legion. And we did, but it was a very close call. It wouldn't have been possible without Empress Leiko's fighter cover.
It was an honor to cover your forces, Colonel Austin. Your brave actions quickly brought an end to this unholy menace.
The military threat posed by Legion units was effectively ended, but the Countess still had to be taken care of. And you took that duty upon yourself, Empress.
It had to be so, Colonel. This was the final settlement between the Solar Empire and Old Xylvania. The Countess was so blinded by her raw power that she lowered her guard too soon. That is how I was able to defeat her.
I actually saw nothing of your fight with Ingrid. As soon as you traded the first blow, there was a blinding light and I lost consciousness.
There wasn't much to see.
Ingrid.
With the Legion ended, there was nothing standing between the Alliance of Nations and the Vladstag. The time had come for our final assault. We wasted no time and surrounded the city from all sides. But it was Betty who led the assault into the city itself.
I wasn't alone. It was clearly a team effort. Nova accompanied me with his rifle grunts and gunships, and Leiko had also sent her personal vanguard.
This was the most ignoble day of my life, seeing my beautiful city slowly overrun by the treacherous enemy. After suffering centuries of injustice, this was to be Xylvania's destiny.
If that can make you feel better, taking the Vladstag was no piece of cake. The city was protected by 3 layers of defensive walls, and advancing troops were constantly shelled by Xylvanian artillery, not to mention the bombers attacking from above. And when we finally reached the Xylvanian General Headquarters, we found ourselves face to face with 2 battle stations. I remember feeling my heart sink a little. But thanks to Nova's gunships, we were able to clear the way and capture the building.
And finally, the war was over, but there was one more errand to attend to.
If you're talking about capturing me, rest assured, you are never going to succeed, Marshal.
I was not far from succeeding, Kaiser Vlad.
My escape plan had been prepared days in advance. Do not be stupid. Do you really believe I would have let myself be captured so easily?
We did capture Commandant Ubel.
He was a necessary diversion. He unfortunately had to take the fall for me. I'm sure he was glad to.
In any case, even with Kaiser Vlad escaping us, the war was definitely over.
Yep, with an outright win for the Alliance of Nations.
But it was a costly one. The war had exacted a heavy toll on our army.
We had to fight. Our only hope to achieve peace was to defeat the Xylvanians, and so we did.
Austin, I like your triumphant tone today.
I didn't mean it like that.
Well, at least the war got you 2 together.
And with that, I think we can conclude. Betty, Herman, Marshal Nova, Empress Leiko, and of course Nellie. It was an absolute pleasure to spend time with you all. Kaiser Vlad.
I will see you soon, generals of the Alliance of Nations. You can count on it.
And thank you all for watching or listening. I hope to see you again in the future.
Blimey! What happened here? It looks like they had tea and cookies. Why didn't they invite me?